Okay, well, welcome to this final session. I know you're all tired from, all this intellectual work in the evenings. But, this session is an audience session. I'm just here to make the stage look pretty. It's all about what you folks have to say. As you can see on the screen, and this is the only slide in this presentation, this year, 2014, is the web's 25th anniversary, and it also happens to be the W3C's 20th anniversary. So the idea is, in this session, to look forward, look backwards, take the time to think about what's happened in the web over the past 25 years, and what could happen over the next 25 years. I mean, 25 years sounds like a long time, but the past 25 years went by pretty quickly. I mean, I don't know how long it's been that you've been doing web tech or things related to web tech, but to me, it feels like it just flew by. So the idea is really that you raise your hand, maybe you want to say something about what you'd like the web to be fairly soon, and I'll try to, help more information come out, or you want to complain about something about the web, how the web is today, and I'll also try to bring this into a discussion. So is there anyone who wants to start and jump in? Alex.
I tweeted this already, but basically what I would love to see is parity between what HTML can do and what we can do with arbitrary XML. We should have linking, we should have embedded media, and we should have scripting for everything, for all kinds of markup. But we don't, and there's zero technical reason why that is, other than lack of will.
Well, lack of will is a fairly strong reason.
Maybe. I would say it's lack of will of the vendors to do something about it. It's not, I could submit patches all day to WebKit, they'll never see the light of day.
So, well, there's one thing you can do, and I think I actually demoed this 2 or 3 years ago, which is that if you can import script into XML, served as XML on the web, if you use a script element in the XHTML namespace. And it imports script, it loads script. And then you can do whatever you want with the rest of your document. You can process it, and you could import components that would implement linking and everything else. I'm not saying it's perfect, but what? We're actually not that far, is what I'm saying, I guess. If you, kind of hold your nose like this. It's the web, it's not pretty. Yes?
Yeah, as you mentioned, namespaces. One complaint would be, you saw my demo last night, and I created TI head elements. Head in TI is what title is in DocBook. And this, despite it was in the TI namespace, was interpreted as an HTML head element. So I couldn't really create TI head elements in Saxon CE. And I think this should be possible to create a head element in another namespace.
So it would be possible. It actually normally is possible. It depends how that element enters the pipeline. So for instance, if you have a head element in the body of an HTML page that is served as text/HTML, and so processed as HTML, then it will be taken to be an HTML head element. But normally, if you use create elements NS with the namespace, or if you serve the document as XML and it's properly namespaced, then you should normally not get an HTML head element, but a TEI head element.
Yeah, it was created by Saxon CE. I think it was so it wasn't served as anything, but it was created in the DOM. But maybe I should first file a bug with Saxon, so maybe it's their issue.
I suspect it's a Saxon bug. Or either that, or maybe you were using inner HTML, possibly. or something in the stack when you feed
I don't think that the people at Saxonica ever thought about using inner HTML.
You never know, but maybe somewhere along the line, because you had quite a few components involved there. Notably, you had it's a CK editor that you repurposed, right?
Yeah.
I wouldn't be surprised if somewhere along the line something like inner HTML got invoked, and that would treat it as HTML.
Yeah, that may be the case. I'll try that without CK editor because they introduce some other issues. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. And so in terms of editing, right now the editing situation is appalling for editing on the web. Content editable is terrible. It's almost unfixable, but this is a priority item that we would really like to fix soon. So if you have ideas for things that are missing in terms of editing, rich editing on the web, not just rich text, but rich structure and things like that, specific problems you had with that implementation or anything else, we're really interested in hearing back from that. Yes?
You're asking long term, and in the next 20 years, I won't be necessarily as agile on my web interaction as I am at the moment, which is not very heavy.
Bollocks, of course
but
you will be.
What I would love to see is the web being a much more difficult place for the charlatan. For the sorts of situation where, a very good example in the UK is if you go and do a search for UK passports, what you get these charlatans who come up higher, and basically they charge you for doing something that you can do entirely free at the official site. And it's just got to the stage where, unless you're really on the ball, then it's a place for charlatans. And what can we do to fix it?
So how do you see that working? Something like reputation management or some kind of web? Because
something of those sort of natures. I mean, it's tied up, but you've got certification at the bottom end. But it's something more than that. That when I'm dealing with some reputable agency, I'm actually dealing with that agency, not with some snake oil salesman who's inserted himself in the middle. Let alone malcontents or other miscreants who are actually going to want my credit card details to go off to Nigeria.
So, I mean, the problem is all the gray areas, because for anything that's obviously phishing, we have the safe browsing database that multiple browser vendors plug into, and there's this whole protocol where they actually hash the URL, send it to the safe browser with a bunch of fake hashes as well, so that you can't be tracked by the database. And they keep track of obvious phishing, and that's how the browsers do the phishing warnings. The problem is there's a very fine line between detecting phishing and censorship. There's a point at which some guy might not be actively phishing, but you might really disagree with his what he's trying to explain. And so the Safe Browser database has been very clear on sticking to what is obviously phishing and not stuff that's kind of borderline. So we can't use that for things that are in the gray area. We need a more some kind of reputation network, I would assume. So there was someone up there, and there was Mohammed here, and here, and here. Okay, John, go ahead.
So we had a little discussion last night, so it's worth bringing up here. What I would like to see in the future is an open, safe, and secure web. And to a certain extent, we've enjoyed that over the last 25 years. But I would like to see. I think we need to see measures taken to ensure that continues. So we talked about distributed DNS, for instance, to avoid man-in-the-middle attacks and censorship and things like that. But it seems like there's definitely some technological advances that need to be brought in to ensure that in the future. Definitely, and for anyone who's interested in that, it's a very interesting topic. There is a workshop held jointly by W3C and the IETF in London next month. I don't have the exact dates in mind, but the idea is to basically take everyone from internet and web and put them in the room and figure out some kind of roadmap for making the web and the internet resilient to surveillance and state-level attacks. So yeah, distributed DNS is one of those things.
preventing tracking, etc., etc. So there is going to be work. I have no idea what it would look like, though, to be honest. So hang on.
Hello.
I'm trying to hold a queue in my mind. 1, 2, 3, 4.
I'm one.
Yes, you're one.
Okay, hello. If I'm thinking about future, about safety web and about especially accessibility, I just like to ask you, can you imagine a web without JavaScript in the future?
No. To be honest, we've I mean, there is still some anti-JavaScript sentiment. I think it's time to let go of that because it's completely out of the box. There's no way of going without it. What we can do is every time we notice JavaScript being systematically used for the same task over and over again, then we boil those tasks into the platform. And that means that a number of websites can stop using JavaScript for those things. And this is an ongoing process. For instance, the DOM 4, the current version of the DOM, adds a lot of things that jQuery exposes. And so we're still talking scripting because it's still the DOM, but it does simplify things. And again, in terms of HTML and the various options out there, for very common tasks or high performance tasks or things that are accessibility sensitive, the idea is really to have things go into the platform. But the problem is if we don't do it that way, if we don't let people do JavaScript first and then we standardize, then we tend to get things wrong. Because you create a complex declarative feature that is magical and it actually turns out to be wrong. And this happened recently. If you look at App Cache, which is the thing to bring a website offline, it was done as a high-level magical declarative feature and it went horribly wrong. It's completely unusable. It's extremely complex to implement. Whereas there is now an effort called Service Workers to do the same thing in script and to give people the low-level primitives so that they can actually implement their own caching strategy. And I think that will be a lot more helpful. And after a few years of this, we'll go back to something declarative that actually matches what people want to do. But I really don't think we can get rid of JavaScript. I really don't think we should. It's our innovation vector.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks. So we had 1, 2, and 3. Well, go ahead while the mic is passing.
Okay. Well, he has the mic, so go ahead.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. So, well, the security meeting in London is 2 to 7 March 2014, so it's just next month.
2 to 7?
Yes.
Okay. So it's very soon, yeah.
Very soon. Okay. Just wanted to jump about John's things about security and probably it seems like you're asking for more Facebook. So I'm just dubious about that. So
what?
because people can tend to recommend links between each other instead of passing through Google's and all this research that are hacked via CEO or things like that. So recommendation is probably interesting because it probably boils down to having some kind of distributed social network in order to be able to get into those things. But okay, just like that. Well, let me try to summarize those 25 years in 3 parts. 89 to 99 was for hackers that were hacking the web. From 99 to 2001 was for business people using the bubble. 2001 to now is for who? To what you think? What's your thinking?
This is for everyone.
Do you really think that?
We need to get to the point where it is absolutely for everyone. I'm not saying we're there yet. Obviously, just the question of internet penetration is not completely solved. You can't have the web if you don't have the internet. But we're really getting there. Mobile is helping. A lot of people are discovering the web through mobile as their first device. And publishing is slowly but certainly becoming easier, et cetera, et cetera. So I do think that we're on the right track to make it for everyone, even if we're obviously not there yet.
So my point is, so you think everyone should be able to hack JavaScript into the browser?
It doesn't have to. So, well, yeah, no. You don't need to hack JavaScript to start publishing at a simple and fundamental level. You just need some CSS that you stole off the web and some HTML. You can go through tools. There are millions of CMSs. I don't think that everyone needs to hack the web. I just think that everyone should be able to publish to the web. And there are things that we can do to change the way it works. The current setup tends to encourage centralization, where if there's one really good publishing platform, one that's really easy for you, then everyone will tend to flock to that. So you find, I don't know what proportion of the blogs are spread between the 3 top blogging platforms, but it's fairly huge, and that's bad. And obviously people use Facebook and Twitter as publishing platforms, and those are heavily centralized. And we need to find a way of moving away from that so that people can keep their data. There are quite a few interesting projects in this area, things like Unhosted, that try to make it so that you can have your own storage and services can address your storage, and you keep your data, and you can have sort of web applications that interact with it and allow you to publish. There are people more on the semantic web side of things who are working on a similar project called Cross Cloud. So the idea is really to move towards an architecture where you can keep your data and have good tools to publish without having to go to centralized, super cool, whatever's the latest cool publishing platform. So again, we're not there yet, but we're making progress towards an architecture that really enables everyone to publish. And by publish, I don't mean hacking JavaScript yourself, but having the tools you need to publish what you want to publish. So in the queue, we had...
So yeah, I think it's fair to assume that today one of the biggest driving force behind the web is web app development. Yesterday you insisted pretty much on the behavioral aspect of web components, and I think some people that I would say are pretty extremists see the future of the web as being using JavaScript as an assembly language to produce content for the canvas. Well, that's pretty extreme. But I think that there might be, well, do you think there is a divergence between the web as a platform for application development and the web as a platform for describing and publishing content?
No, I don't think. I think that's a false dichotomy. Yes, you will find people who want to do everything on the canvas, and if that becomes anywhere near mainstream, either of two things will happen. Either they'll realize that they're shooting themselves in the foot because they have all sorts of other problems, because implementing your own rendering engine is not fun, and because, accessibility, et cetera, et cetera. Or it turns out to be a good approach. And, maybe, hitting canvas directly, being hardware accelerated, whatever, it actually gives you performance that you couldn't get with HTML because you can throw away a lot of the crap that we've accumulated over 25 years, in which case we will figure out solutions to make that useful for everyone. So we will figure out ways of making it accessible. We'll figure out ways of turning it, making it maintainable, etc. So one way or another, I don't think that we'll see any kind of divergence there.
Thanks.
Thank you. So we had...
Hello. Relates to a comment you made in answer to the question, can you envisage a web without JavaScript? No. But I wanted to ask the same sort of question in much broader and more abstract terms. In the history of computing, we've had three great monocultures. We've had the IBM mainframe, we've had the Windows platform, we've got the web. Those monocultures exist because of the economic benefits of doing the same as everyone else and being part of the community and the synergies that exist through de facto standardization. The previous two were a bit different from the current one in that the system of governance was rather different, the decision-making process was different. There were relationships between a vendor and its customers that led to a certain balance between stability and backwards compatibility versus innovation and ability to change. Those monocultures are extremely persistent. It's very hard to displace them because the cost of entry and of doing something different becomes increasingly higher. But the fact that we can't envisage the web changing to the extent of a programming language becoming obsolete in 25 years does seem rather worrying. And I do wonder how we get that kind of displacement and innovation in a culture that isn't driven by a commercial relationship between a supplier and its customers. We don't know what the motivation of the web browser vendors is, but it's not to make money out of us in the traditional way. We don't get a choice as consumers as to where we spend our money because we aren't spending it, it's all free. So I wonder how you see what is going to happen. Will it struggle on until it becomes technically so badly structured and incapable of refactoring at a software engineering level that someone else is going to invent something better and the innovators will switch and then everyone else will follow? Or will it collapse under its own weight? Or will it be capable of absorbing change and doing new things? What will be the dynamics of the web over that kind of extended period?
So obviously I can't predict, but here's my best.
Oh, you must. I asked you the question. Okay. I expect an answer.
So I will predict. I would like to separate two things when I said no to can you envision a web without JavaScript. There are two things. There's JavaScript, the language, the concrete language as we know it today, and there is the JavaScript, the extension point where you can just program things and hit APIs and manipulate the DOM. And I do think that it's possible that in 25 years we'll have JavaScript will have largely disappeared. It's entirely possible. But the functionality of being able to program the web in the way that JavaScript provides it, I think will stay. And the way in which it could be displaced is through JavaScript. That's kind of the sort of weird magic. When I say it's the innovation point, it's one of the major extensibility points. It really means that you could create a new language, implement it on top of the JavaScript VM, and start using it on the web. And if it really gains traction, so there are examples like TypeScript or CoffeeScript or a bunch of other hipster things. Sorry? XSLT2 is now running. No, but seriously, Frameless is a great example of this. If it turns out that that XSLT2 is really a much better language to do web applications, it could displace JavaScript, but the way in which it would displace JavaScript is through JavaScript, is by using the JavaScript VM. And after a while, if you start having 3% of the pages using this, 5% of the pages using this, it starts to make sense to implement it in the browser and start the motion towards displacement. So I think that one of the values of the web ecosystem as it is today is precisely that it enables innovation from within in a distributed fashion that can eventually succeed and displace stuff that we consider to be absolutely immovable.
Who's we?
We are the web developers. People hacking on the web. We the web. Does that address your question, or?
Yes, I think the who is we is crucial. The decision-making process is very strange.
It is. Well, it's. I would like to get at, so I didn't use those slides today, but in the previous version of my web components talk that I gave at Takeoff, which is much more web developers oriented, I showed the way that web standards are made today, where you basically have some vendor or person having an idea, bringing it to standards, then it goes back to implementation, and then by the time it reaches developers, it's too late for them to provide feedback, and they don't know how to influence the process. And the idea of the Extensible Web Manifesto and this new movement that has taken over the TAG, the Technical Architecture Group, and a bunch of other places, is to try to make it so that you start with developers creating a new library and not caring about standards to start with. And as that becomes stable and popular, you move it towards the standards so that it can get inside implementations as a sedimented layer of innovation. This is something that succeeded, so let's make it actually a first-class citizen platform. So the idea is really to not have a decision process and to remove as much as possible browser vendors from the critical path to innovation, which again is not an anti-browser vendor position. It's something they tend to agree with, because otherwise there's too much pressure on them as a choke point for new features. So if we manage to get there, exposing primitives that allow people to innovate directly in script and then take those innovations and make them part of the platform when they've succeeded, I think we'll have a good mechanism for preservation, long-term preservation of the web.
Well, that's certainly a very fundamental shift of attitude from the 1 hour sensing sort of 3 or 4 years ago, where they definitely were a choke point. And
yes, things do get better, and
not always.
Well, in this case, I have hope. And now I forgot the cue.
Can I, or is there someone else? All right. In the past 25 years, we've seen a myriad of standards, messy implementations of these standards, browser hacks to detect what kind of browser we're in, ECMAScript, JavaScript, and so on and so forth. It was a mess. Can we take the next 25 years to clean up that mess?
No, because a lot of the past 10 years has been occupied with cleaning up that mess. A lot of people still don't realize this, but so when people talk about HTML5, wow, bunch of brand new features, what actually goes into those blog posts and announcements, etc., is hey, you have video and you have audio and you have those new APIs. But for me, that's not the biggest value in HTML5. I could do without video. I almost never use it. But what's really, really fundamental is the increase in interoperability in the lower layers. So HTML5 defines a parsing algorithm that will turn any stream of text into something that's a predictable DOM. And this means that the mess in terms of parsing and different DOMs in different browsers is now a thing of the past. And it also defines a host of other basic behaviors, very low-level basic behaviors that have been cleaned up. It's definitely not finished. There's still a lot of work on encodings, on URL parsing, all the crappy low-level stuff that never worked is getting a lot better. So the whole mopping up work, much of which was done by the working group, is actually well advanced. So I don't think that we're going to spend the next 25 years cleaning it up. Most of it has been cleaned up. I think there's another good 10 years of cleaning up the last details. But it's one of those things where at this point, I think we've cleaned up so much that things are actually good. And if you use recent browsers that implement the spec, of course. But the additional cleaning up that we can do has decreasing value, obviously, over time, since you're cleaning up smaller and smaller parts of the platform. But still, I don't think we're looking at 25 years of cleanup. Another decade at most.
Well, that sounds good. Only 10 years?
We won't even see it go by. I think after there's John and.
I'd like to continue to argue about JavaScript, just because I hate it.
It's a lovely language. Try it again.
Yeah. Well, I don't believe in your idea that at some point JavaScript will be subverted by some of its successors with better features. Just because JavaScript is terrible. all of us know that, and all of us know how hard to write in it, and there is plenty of different attempts to make it at least suitable for some commercial use. And one of the examples of that attempts, jQuery. We have it for like, I don't know, 5 years already, right?
A bit more, yeah.
And it's everywhere. And it's used to make, well, I don't think that we currently have a JavaScript developer that can develop in JavaScript without jQuery.
No, that's not true.
Well, most of them. I mean, that's a good example of what we have already. Extremely widespread, but it's not in the, how do you call that, in the core, in the basement, and it never will be. So
yes, it will be. Of course it will be. I said so earlier. A lot of what jQuery adds, and I'm not talking about the parts that paper over old interop problems, I'm talking about the new APIs, have made their way into DOM 4 and will become part of DOM 4. jQuery, one of the biggest parts of jQuery used to be its CSS selector engine, Sizzle, and that is now part of the platform as Query Selector. So they still have to ship it because all the browsers don't yet support that. But as browsers evolve, they're going to be able to just drop their own CSS selector engine and just call the browser system. It takes time, but pretty much all the good ideas found in jQuery are making their way to the platform. They're being baked into the platform directly.
well, okay, I think that I'll wait another 25 years and see will JavaScript as it looks now die or won't it?
It won't die. JavaScript is Perl 6. That's why it's the best language ever. I'm serious. JavaScript really is Perl 6. That's why it's good.
I'm no longer programming in Fortran or in COBOL. And I wonder if we're coming to a different way of doing things as the web matures. We developed a lot of things. I was on the DOM 1 committee. And, I remember, with the XML working group and with DOM 1 and with XSLT, there was this sense of we had to get things going because we didn't have anything that people could interoperate with. We had to create the standard and the technology at the same time. We had to do that in a very messy political process. It seems like, in some ways, the web is trying to fix itself, that things like AngularJS are trying to fix the problems that we have with JavaScript. And that a lot of this is not being done by standards groups. And that we're going to be facing a large number of different kinds of frameworks trying to address the same problems. And eventually the web will choose which ones. I don't know if that'll be done by standards or by markets.
A bit of both.
But I doubt very much that we know to what extent JavaScript will be the language or whether there's going to be a successor that fills in the holes for some kind of frameworks that, I think if we'd said that COBOL would almost not exist back 25 years ago, that would have been very hard to believe.
No, but again, as I said, I don't think that necessarily JavaScript as we know it will stay, but the same type of functionality, I think, will have to remain as an extension point. And in terms of the web fixing itself, that's exactly where we want to go. Standards should not make innovation; they should enable innovation. And it's when we get to the point where people can actually start fixing things without having to go through a standards process, it's a win. And afterwards we can figure out ways of bringing that back into the standards fold so that it's properly interoperable. I think that works better. John, so we have he was in the queue first, and then.
You hit on you pushed one of my buttons, which was JavaScript as the VM for the web. So I just wanted to kind of to plant a seed and wonder whether we can get somewhere with this, because I'm familiar with a number of different compilation techniques for different languages, interesting languages that work in different ways. And for instance, a lot of when we started compiling a lot of the languages 20 years ago, then it was commonplace to compile them into C and then to invoke the C compiler to compile those to the machine. And what you find is that for a lot of the interesting features that don't really match parity-wise with the underlying language, that's really quite restrictive, and you end up writing a lot of code to get around that. When people compile to the actual machine that's underneath it, they've got a whole lot more that's available to them in order to, do fancy things like continuations or whatever it might be. I mean, and so what I would really love to see is the JavaScript VM as a defined platform that you could write bytecode to. Because, for instance, when you look at something like Scala or F#, that have been defined on top of other virtual machines, but it wouldn't have been possible to write F# in terms of C#, at least not as efficiently as it currently is. It wouldn't have been possible to do the same for Scala on top of the Java virtual machine. And so I have to admit that I don't really believe in efficient replacement languages for JavaScript until we have some kind of definition of a virtual machine for the browser.
Well, so the thing is, I mean, I don't necessarily disagree, though. I don't see that happening in the short term. There isn't. I haven't seen much interest, but I don't think that. I mean, I think that new languages, any new language that might displace JavaScript will do so without being efficient at first. It will be popular for other reasons, and it will be sufficiently efficient to be usable because the underlying JavaScript VM is becoming insanely good. But it will provide incentive to actually support it directly in the platform in order to make it more efficient. But there have been proposals for JSVM bytecode, basically. So far, none of them have come anywhere near to flying. But it might be one of those things where people have to propose it for 5 years, and then everyone goes, "Oh, of course, why haven't we done that?" So I don't know. The problem also even with VMs is that VMs do constrain you anyway, even if you have bytecode, because it's not low-level machine bytecode. The JVM is not very good at a number of dynamic language features. If you try to do Python or Ruby on a JVM, it's fairly dreadful in terms of performance. So I don't know if it helps that much to expose a VM unless it has specific features, for F# of functional languages or whatever. I'm not sure how much it helps. It would be good to have benchmarks if someone were to do that. We had Jim and then I believe Norm. I can't see the whole room, so
Yeah, in the same sentence, you hit a button for me as well as John's, but it's a different button.
Hitting all those buttons.
It was the term innovation. I think in actuality, it's quite trendy to say software is eating the world today, and JavaScript is very important, and everything we do is very important. But actually, it's the hardware advances that represent the biggest shifts to what we're doing, and they precede each wave of what we see, at our level. Do you in your far and broad and wide-ranging experience and many conversations, do you see any hardware advances that is going to completely remove all our notions, and we're going to have to reconfigure how we consider ourselves as programmers, markup, and JavaScript?
So I don't know of upcoming hardware advances, but I know of two things that are hardware related and ought to make a sizable difference soon. One of them is generic access to hardware from a web context. Right now it's very ad hoc. You have to create a new API, expose it to all browsers, etc. It doesn't really work. If we can figure out a security model to expose any kind of new hardware using an HTTP interface or something like it that's discoverable, etc., to the web page context, securely, obviously, then we will see a new wave of innovation in hardware usage from the web. The other thing that I think is really important is that we're currently completely underusing our multi-core present, and it's not about the future thing. Is that today a typical browser rendering, well, the browser rendering is single-threaded. The processing is fairly complex in terms of event loops, etc. But if we could parallelize it more, we'd see an improvement in performance that would likely be staggering. So people like Mozilla currently has created a new language called Rust with its own runtime, and they're working on re-implementing a browser from scratch in a project called Servo. And that is designed to be able to make use of a large number of cores at the same time. In addition to that, people are starting to think about what parts of CSS can properly be made asynchronous, what parts of the event model could be made more asynchronous. Right now, for instance, there was a really good talk by Paul Rouget recently, where he explained that scrolling on the web platform is synchronous. So any processing you do in reacting to a scroll event will actually stop scrolling because it's doing something else. It can't scroll. And that's obviously extremely painful. So we're really trying to, there's a lot of work trying to move towards something that's more parallelized. And once we get there, we'll see massive improvements, I'm fairly sure. I have no idea where we are in terms of queue. Either one of you.
Okay. So you can't push any of my buttons. I've been ground under by the process. They're all worn away. So you've outlined a plausible strategy, at least in broad terms, for moving from JavaScript to something better. Is there a similar strategy for moving from HTML to something better? Can I get my DocBook or TEI or DITA back on the web, or should I just accept failure and move on?
I think you should accept failure and move on. But within
grinding a little more, that's just lovely.
No, seriously, it depends on what you want out of using those formats on the web. If you want to render them, you can already do that. I mean, the CSS actually works today, and you can actually link these documents. You can actually link CSS into these documents, and it will work. It will render. I mean, I showed a magnificent example of DocBook here a few years ago. But in terms, the problem is in terms of behavior. How do you get them to behave? How do you get links to work? How do you get a bunch of other things to work? That's the harder problem. There is currently no link from anything XML to anything components-based that could actually lead to this sort of displacement, but it could be made. As I explained in my talk yesterday, the delta is very, very small. And we could imagine, I expect it would, I haven't tried this, and all of this is way too brand new technology, but I suspect that if you used a link element in the HTML namespace in your XML and used that to import a web component, it would actually work. And in working, well, there may be some technicalities, but it could be made to work. So we're definitely moving towards an idea, a situation where people can add elements to HTML. In terms of completely throwing everything away and replacing it, it may be asking a bit much in the current state of play, but I think we might get there. For me, the biggest impediments would mostly be about the decoration. So you might have to keep the HTML root elements, the HTML head, and then just dump some DocBook in the body. I don't know if that's acceptable to you in terms of transition, but it's a potential evolution. Of course, I'm not sure of the exact value of doing that for document-based formats, as opposed to things that might be more interactive. But I think that there's a way forward. I'm not sure it's very clean at this point.
Okay, so JavaScript again.
Yeah.
Okay, if you say that JavaScript or another JVM similar language will be such a standard in the future, do you think that if it's good that or cause developers are using JavaScript many times and very much, and they've forgotten that JavaScript is an optional choice in the browser, and I don't know if it's good make standard from something what's optional.
So the thing is, I'm not convinced that JavaScript is optional anymore. Yes, you can turn it off in your browser in the same way that you can turn off CSS and a bunch of image loading.
Yes. Yes.
I'm not sure that you can do that and still expect the web to work.
Yes, but here in Czech Republic, for example, in hospitals, there is a globally JavaScript disabled.
That's bad system administration.
Yeah. Okay.
I can see the wrong reasons why they did that, but they really are wrong reasons. I mean, it's not the right thing to do. In terms of privacy, it's actually worse when you disable JavaScript. You're in such a minority that by just using the flag that you've disabled JavaScript plus your IP address uniquely identifies you in the world. It's perfect.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so the question to the expert.
JavaScript.
No.
Oh, okay.
So the most of discussion is about what will be going on within the internet. So the question, do you think that there are any threats for the web from the outside? So what makes me think so? So we have several trends, like desktops replaced with laptops replaced with mobile computers, and probably following trends would be wearable computers, Internet of Things, and so on. Some of those devices probably won't be web-enabled, for example. And if we talk one additional trend from the traffic analysis, so for example on mobile devices, more traffic comes from special applications than from web applications. So actually we still have internet, we have REST services, but it's served by native application for mobile devices. So is that is web in danger or not?
There's always a threat of something better coming up. But I think in terms of applications, we're not seeing the end of the web that was predicted a few years ago by Wired and a bunch of other newspapers. It hasn't happened. And the reason for that is because nothing in that in the application ecosystem has some of the values of the web in terms of shareability and linkability. And it turns out that people actually use links a lot in social networking, for instance. So we haven't seen the displacement of the web, even on mobile devices, that has been predicted. Also, people tend to have those statistics for smartphones. But it turns out that even in the richest countries, smartphones are only 50% penetration, and the other half is feature phones. And those don't have those apps, and those use the web. And there was actually a really good article last year from Gov.uk talking about how all those government agencies always want to do cool apps because that's what cool people do, and they want to be cool, and they want to be seen to be cool, etc. But they always say no unless there's a really good reason, because it turns out that when you do that, well, half the population can't access it. And what they see in terms of usage, people tend to have more return usage to a website that's been useful and that actually works for some kind of paperwork or anything than they would with an app. They don't know why, but that's the case. In terms of other potential displacement threats, like things like Internet of Things, it depends what you mean by web-enabled. Obviously, a light bulb that supports, one of the new Internet of Things thing doesn't have any screen to show HTML or whatever on. So in that sense, it's not web-enabled. But most of those devices are actually running HTTP. A lot of the networking that's going on is HTTP based, and so you can, with a web page, address those devices directly, so you could have your web-enabled device talking to all of your Internet of Things over the web. So I don't, in terms of what I've seen happen in Internet of Things, I don't see a displacement. I actually see more of a reinforcement. And finally, if you look at things like Firefox OS and the new web-based operating systems, they're very impressive. I mean, if you look at Firefox OS, it's going to be, if you look at it after the first year, it was already a usable operating system with applications and stuff and high-level graphics and that running on phones and things like that. So they've done an impressive job. They're pushing really hard. They've only officially shipped in a small number of countries so far, but since they hit the, they're going for the $40 smartphone market, which is a very interesting market. And in countries where they shipped, I know that I think it was in Colombia, within a month they had 13% of the market. And they're going to be able to do, I think, to reproduce the same thing in a number of other countries. And those are purely web apps. So, you know, I think overall it looks pretty good. Who's Mohammed?
Yeah, me again. So I think I'm okay with those JavaScript things. Just I think we just have to let it go. So, but I think that's it attracts a lot of people and as a honeypot, and they don't see what happened around. So it seems to be a problem. So first question is email. This is static document. We don't have JavaScript, and it's probably we won't have JavaScript in it. So how will we solve this problem? So it's open question. Second open question. It seems to be related to annotation and RDF and all this kind of thing. This is, can we think that the web will be more declarative in the next future than it is now? Because as I understand what you're saying is that today we're trying to make it more declarative by hacking in JavaScript. That's your way of seeing things. Mm-hmm. At the same time, we try to change low-level protocols. HTTP2 will be binary instead of being text, and it seems to be something that will change a lot of would say, base foundation of the web. You know, everything is open, everything is text, everything is hackable. JavaScript is text, CSS is text, HTML is text, so everything is good. But if we change the foundation and we make binary, how can we be sure that in the future everything will stay text on top of that, and that we are really going in this annotation style thing without too much binary or even worse than that?
So I think your two questions are related, and the second one is a troll, but you didn't notice it. In terms of email, there's a community group that was created recently called HTML, and the goal of that group is to define what is permissible and how it works to use HTML as an emailing format. The reason for that is that if you've ever tried to do HTML for email today, basically you're straight back to 96. You cannot import CSS, you cannot use any script, you have to do your layout with tables, you have to change your fonts with the font element. You can sometimes use the style attribute, but it's painful, you have to repeat it, etc. So the idea is really for that group to define a usable subset of HTML and a process that maps arbitrary HTML to a common limited HTML that can work for email, that can work in webmail clients and things like that. So we're really going to make progress on that. One thing that's interesting is that, so yeah, at this point, no one wants to have JavaScript in email. It's a fairly big no-no. But people are thinking of ways of adding interactivity anyway. And the way that happens is there's a proposal by Google, and I forget what it's called, but it's something that works in Gmail today. If you add certain types of metadata to your HTML email, it will take it into account. So I forget what the exact things are, but you can You can mark, I think it's using RDFA, you can mark up things as being a date for a meeting, and it will offer you the ability to save it into your calendar. And we're talking about the ability of marking up something as an address, and it will provide you an affordance to see a map and maybe directions to go there. And I think that's interesting because it means that for email, for HTML email, we have to go declarative first, because no one wants to have script, even though, of course, it will be JavaScript in the webmail implementing the feature, but that's almost a side consideration. And so for email, we're going to see an increased use of metadata, declarative metadata, that adds limited, constrained, but useful functionality to email, where you don't want your email to be an application, but you do want it to have a bit more interactivity than the default thing. Now, to go to your other comment about binary and keeping things hackable, I don't think that switching to binary removes the hackability. If you look at email, it's a text format. It's a horrible, horrendous text format. It's unhackable. I mean, if you try to hack MIME, any kind of complex MIME by hand, you're going to kill yourself. Seriously, it's really bad. Whereas some binary formats, obviously you can't just load up a text editor, and even a hex editor tends to be painful. But if you have decent tooling, if the format is easy enough to understand, then you can interact with it. And we've had this debates on and on 10 years ago about binary XML and how it was supposed to make all of a sudden XML proprietary because it became binary, and I don't think that's true. If you have the proper tools to handle it, then it remains hackable. I mean, text itself, Unicode, is a binary format. And you really want to be dealing with the high-level code points through a tool called the text editor rather than with the low-level encoding, because if you start looking at surrogate points, you're not going to understand the text very well. So I don't think that HTTP2 moving to binary is a problem at all. I'm fairly sure we'll have excellent tooling to deal with it.
Well, it's just to finish about that. Is it because mail is more about document than the web is about document?
I think there was yes.
How do you see the role of databases for the web? How do you see the role of databases for the web and the future of the web?
So I'm not at all a database expert, but there's one trend that I've noticed recently. It used to be that we only had a few, well, it was a large few, but the set of databases that were available to people was relatively constant. And in recent years, we've seen an explosion of everyone and their dog has invented a new database system with slightly different properties. And those properties are interesting. The problem is it becomes really difficult to shop for the database you want because none of them has all the features. And you might think that one of them actually, that one of them matches your needs, and it turns out that it's not really well supported, etc. So what, at least at my level, from basic web developer level, what I would really like to see is some kind of Lego databases. So where I can pick some database components, put them together, and have something that matches my needs precisely, without having to care about all the rest, and without having to pick between a million different database systems. There's also another thing that I noticed that's interesting. I think it's ArangoDB does that. They have a very thin layer that is basically a web server that can serve static documents and nothing more, and can do authentication. And so basically with those two things, you can serve a web page and then authenticate, users can be authenticated if you need to, and you can address the database directly from your web page. So you can basically write an application entirely on the client side, talking directly to the database, just using static file serving and authentication. I thought that was a pretty neat feature in terms of web development. It makes a lot of sense. But beyond that, I'm not at all an expert. I can't even understand what ACID means, but I use JSON databases, so you'd expect that. I think we're done. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I found this to be an interesting session.